I think strength is allowing your emotions to be what they are and feel your feelings.
Right.
That's being strong because it doesn't change who you are.
Welcome to another episode of Strong Place, a podcast hosted by Mental Health America of Central Carolinas. My name is Aya Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director. And I'm joined today by our guest, LaTrice Davis, also popularly known as JAG. LaTrice is a former professional athlete, now inspiring women's health and wellness speaker and coach. LaTrice is inspiring wellness by her commitment to advancing women's health. She guides women on a journey of living fit, fully invested in transformation. As the founder of Inspired Wellness by JAG, she advocates for a holistic wellness approach that cultivates healthy habits surrounding physical, mental, and spiritual well-being while driving transformative change both personally and professionally. LaTrice has a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in mental health counseling, and a dual certification in life and health coaching. However, her most crucial role is simply being a real woman, living a real life while empowering others to lead a more meaningful, purposeful, and fulfilling life. Welcome to Strong Place.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you as my guest today. I've been following you on Instagram for a while and didn't even know that you knew anything about MHA. And then I showed up to a panel discussion that one of my staff was on to support her, and you were the host. And I was just so happy to see you and meet you in person, and just inspired just by everything that you're doing in the space and doing for women.
Thank you.
And I think we have a lot in common, so I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
All right. I'm looking forward as well.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your personal mental health story and how you started like coaching women and being a champion for us living holistically.
Oh, gosh. So how much time do we have? The story is a long one, but back in 2010, I was going through a divorce. And I recognized going through that divorce that my childhood had just collided with my adulthood. And what I mean by that is I recognized that the things that I ran from in my childhood, all of the things that I'd gone through kind of followed me into marriage. And ultimately, the marriage ended and I had to kind of face who I was and what was going on in my life. And I struggled with understanding who I was. And so I kind of started on a fitness journey. And the fitness journey kind of brought me to a mental health space in which I began to understand more about who I was as a person. And I recognized that I dealt with anxiety and depression and low self-esteem growing up as a child and masked all of it because nobody ever really knew. But I walked around often having these feelings about who I was. However, it wasn't presenting to the world. The world saw me differently. And I often tell people that I would go home, close the doors and close the blinds and became a different person. And at the point of my marriage ending in 2010, I really set out on a journey for myself to really kind of uncover what the root of all of it was, to understand what mental health really looked like for me, because growing up, we didn't talk about that at all. As a child, you didn't have things happen, you swept them under the rug and you just kind of kept going. And I am the oldest of three. My father, when I was younger, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so because I was the oldest, I was kind of the next in line. My mother had to work. And so you didn't have time to feel bad and deal with mental health issues. I didn't have time to talk about how depressed I was feeling. I wasn't able to explain my sleeping habits and how I was sleeping all the time, or how I wasn't eating, or how I was teased at school for being dark-skinned. I didn't have the space to really talk about those things. So when you mask them for so long, they spill over into the rest of your life. So that's kind of where 2010 was a turning point in my life, where I decided that I was going to really take control over what I knew and then unlearn those things to relearn something else where I could help myself. I never really set out to help other people. I was really focused on how can I get better. And I think in that space, my authenticity kind of touched other people's lives. But I never set out to really do anything other than figure out what was going on with me.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have even more in common than I realized. I'm also the oldest of three.
Okay.
And my mom worked a lot, and she was climbing the corporate ladder. And so, yeah, I became next in line, like you said, you know, to take care of their family and take care of my siblings. I always call my younger brother and sister my first set of kids.
That's right.
And often I call my sister my daughter's name, and so I totally get that. And I think having that responsibility young, it makes us have to grow up faster. And I wonder, do you think that having to mature quickly to be responsible for two other people when you were young yourself, did it maybe change or alter how you were able to develop and grow and cultivate your own mental health as a youth?
Interestingly enough, I have always had a mind that if I set my mind to do something, I was always going to do it. And I think that helped me move through life as a young person. I was always very able to compartmentalize things. And so I grew up being able to do that. I am the oldest and the only girl in the family. So I have two younger brothers that I helped take care of. And because my father was disabled, I had to kind of step into that role too. And so I think growing up that fast, that young, didn't allow me the opportunity to be a kid and understand what fun was all about. At the same time that was going on, however, I was being teased in school. We call it bullying these days, but I was just being teased for being dark-skinned. And I remember often going home in tears, like just frustrated, but I didn't have anywhere to kind of release the emotion because you get home, you have things to do and responsibilities. So it never really talked about it to a lot of people. So for a long time, people didn't really know. It helped me develop responsibility as a child growing into adulthood, but it never really helped me cope with the feelings that I was having. Growing up fast makes you responsible quickly, and you don't have time to feel. You just have to do. And so that's what I learned as a child growing up. But at some point, it collided where I couldn't figure out or separate my feelings from the things I had to do. Like I knew I didn't feel well, but I couldn't show that. I couldn't say it because I had other responsibilities. So I've always had the responsibility. I have 3 daughters, so I'm always doing. I was never able to just sit with my feeling and understand what those were and how to process them. So it was great on one end because I became an adult early, but it lacked I kind of feel like I wasn't given the opportunity to really enjoy what life was. And so when I got older, I wanted to do that, but I still felt like I couldn't because I had responsibility. Yeah.
That childhood experience, right, that we both had of having to mature quickly, having those responsibilities. Did you ever have a period, you said you just wanted to have fun. Did you have that period of, I'm just going to do me, and kind of threw caution to the wind and, went off the rails? I know I did. Did you have that experience at all? Or were you like always so really focused?
I never had that experience growing up. I was always really focused. So I played basketball. By the time I got out of middle school and all of the teasing stopped, I realized that I enjoyed athletics. So I started playing basketball, and I played basketball for the 4 years I was in high school. And that kind of gave me a little sense of relief, but I still felt like I was always responsible. I still had the same responsibilities, getting my brothers back and forth to school, getting home, making sure everything was done because my mom had to work. So I was definitely the next in charge. So I never felt like I had the opportunity to just relax and be a kid. And as I grew up, When I left high school, in my mind, you got to go to college, and you've got to go to college, you got to finish college, you got to start a career. And so I did all of those things and never really got the chance to just do nothing and figure it out or just be reckless. I think we have those moments, but I don't know that I ever got a chance to really enjoy them or see them for what they were. My kids nowadays tell me that I'm too serious. And so I understand that because of that, I developed this very serious nature or responsible nature and not so much of a playful nature. And it wasn't until 2010 that I really looked at that and understood what that meant and tried to shift it for myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
2010, you're going through a divorce. Did you immediately go into therapy? Did you realize there was some self-work that you wanted to do, or was that like a process?
It's a process. Now, funny thing is my bachelor's degree is in psychology and my master's degree is in counseling. And I've always understood what counseling was. I've always helped people kind of navigate these spaces, but I was not sure that it was for me. And part of that is because I thought I'm a professional in this space. So why do I need it? I know what to do. But at a certain point through the divorce, I really needed to. Like, I really needed to talk to somebody to help navigate the anger and the frustration. And also being a mom, raising daughters, not really being comfortable with who I was. People saw me as very confident all the time.
Right.
That's what I got all the time. Very confident, very poised. But I never felt that internally. I projected it because, of course, we have our public persona and then we have our personal.
Right.
So I've always been able to project that, but it was never authentic to who I was. It was me pretending to do the things that I needed to do so that people saw me a certain way. And so during that time, I decided to go to therapy. But I decided to go to therapy at that time because I was angry, not because I was trying to figure me out. It was later on that I embraced what therapy really was. And I feel like for me, it's always a lifelong understanding and journey. It's not just a one-time thing.
Right.
And I promote that quite often because I think that people that are in the helping profession like I have been need to be able to unload what's going on with us.
Right.
And we need to be able to do that in the same safe space that we provide for other people. And so now I'm always looking for someone to talk to navigate, because sometimes you really just need to hear a different perspective.
Right.
And to help you navigate through whatever you're going through.
Right. When you talked about projecting a different persona publicly, do you think that being an athlete had something to do with how you instinctively knew or went that way? Like when I see athletes, especially I think the higher the level that you play at, you are always guarding your emotions, right? So I've never been a professional athlete, but I see them do interviews. They just seem to be a common thread. It's almost like being a celebrity, you know what I mean? Right. There's the public you, and then there's the private you, and often the twain shall not mix.
They shall not mix.
Right.
So yes, it was easy to become and live in the space of being an athlete and let people see that than to allow people to see kind of what was really going on. The one thing that's important for me to say is that I kept a lot of this private and secret. I didn't talk about my mental health struggles until probably 2010. And so you're talking years and decades of kind of living with it. But I was able, between being an athlete and, being an achiever in college and, all of the things that I've done in my profession, I was able to kind of cover that. It would bleed out when I met people when they got too close.
So relationships.
Yes.
Okay.
Friendships,
that's when both male and both friendships and romantic relationships, or just romantic relationships?
More romantic relationships.
Okay.
That's when my heart would start bleeding and people would really kind of see me. And I struggled with that a lot because I would prefer you to see the confident person that is presenting. So I keep you at an arm's distance. But when you kind of got in to see, I was always very uncomfortable with people seeing the true side of who I was as a person back then. So being an athlete, you get to live in the hype and go home and nobody's there, but you. And so you just deal with you. And that was kind of early on. When I started competing as a figure competitor, I enjoyed the physical nature of developing. And I often coupled that with kind of growing inside. So 2010 was really a transitional and a transformative time for me. Those years, it's probably the decade where it took me about that long to kind of really get to the core of who I was as a person. Now you can't stop me, but but it took some time to get there. And a lot of what I've done is kind of hide behind degrees, athleticism, all of those things that people see and admire, because I never really thought that people cared about what was going on internally for me. I never felt that part.
Right. We're both Black women, right? How do you think, specifically being a Black woman, contributes to some of these things that we've dealt with? Because I feel like we're often not allowed to show that vulnerable side of us. And then when we get into relationships and we do begin to let people see who we really are, that a lot of times brings out that insecurity that you were talking about. And so you think that plays a part? Sometimes people say, no, that's just a human thing, but I think it's a little bit different for us as Black women.
I think it is a little different for us as Black women. I think women on a whole have to live in the shadows of these stereotypes. I think Black women specifically, I don't think we're allowed to show emotion because it's labeled so badly for us. I think we are seen to be strong and people want us to be strong, but when we're not, and when we're in our weaker moments or we're in our frustrated moments, it's frowned upon and it's unfair because as humans, we all have moments where we're not at our best. I don't think that we're often allowed to be expressive because we are seen to be loud and boisterous and, disrespectful. And although some of those things may be true, the heart of a Black woman is not. Like we are, I always love to say, we are the givers and the nurturers of life. Like that's where we started. And we bend over backwards to take care of everyone. And I think we don't give ourselves the love that we give everybody else. I don't think we give ourselves the time that we give everybody else. And I think when we do that, it's seen as being selfish. And I think that that's unfair as well.
Right.
I think we don't get the best support when it comes to standing up for ourselves because we are seen as antagonistic at times.
Right.
And I think that plays into a lot of our insecurities where some of us just kind of cower away. Others of us become even more bold and probably then go overboard. And there's not a real middle ground.
Right.
Yeah. For us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's National Minority Mental Health Month. What are some of your thoughts about how we encourage our communities, people of color, that often, not always, but often are living in underserved communities? How do we begin to empower ourselves to lean in and talk about our mental health more, not feel like we can't talk about it, right? Because I feel like it starts to dehumanize us even more. What would you say, like when you're coaching women, like how to lean in and right? Maybe embrace that power to talk about it.
I think I would start when we're talking about our community as a whole with leadership. I think the conversation of mental health in the minority community has gotten better than it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but it's still not where it needs to be because we still see mental health stigmatized. We still see that distrust in our community with receiving services. With the women that I generally coach, we really kind of start with how we see ourselves first. Like, what is it that you see in yourself? Despite what other people see, what is it that you see? And how to begin to embrace those things. And even if you embrace them privately because you're still not as comfortable embracing them publicly. But let's start there and let's talk about the truth about what mental health looks like, because it looks different for everybody. It definitely looks different for everybody. Just because you have a mental health crisis, you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis, but you do get depressed, you do get anxious, you are having issues with confidence. You may have weight gain or weight loss because you have body dysmorphia. Like those things are real in our community. And I think with regards to leadership, when I say leadership, I do mean those, and I may get into a little trouble. I grew up in church, and in the minority community, church is very important.
Right.
God is, of course, very important. And I think that some of leadership in churches don't really understand mental health. And a lot of us grew up in church understanding that. A lot of our grandparents would never go to see anyone to talk about anything. So I think it's leadership. I think it's generational. So we talk about all of those things, like where did you hear about mental health, the very first time?
Right.
What was your experience the very first time you heard about somebody or even yourself feeling something? What triggered for you?
Right.
What was that about? And I think those are the important questions to ask so that we get individuals comfortable, and especially women, comfortable with sharing how we feel. I know one thing for me is I never want to feel weak or be perceived as being weak.
Yes.
And so talking about those moments make me think that people see me as weak. And so you may not, but in my mind you do. And so those are the struggles I think we have as Black women, is that we don't want to seem weak in front of our children, our spouses, our families, especially when we are the people that take care of everything. But we have those moments, and we need spaces where we can talk about those and really be able to get those emotions out in a safe space where then we can understand what the root is and how to then move forward and deal with it, put things in place, skills in place. But I think it really starts with understanding who we are first.
Right. Yeah, I think that one of the things that I would love to see in the mental health movement, well, let me just say this. I feel like there's a cross sector between the mental health movement, the pandemic, and George Floyd, right? And they overlap, right? They overlap significantly, and Black women, we've been, I think, caught in this really strange crossfire in these three things, because we're coming to our own, right? We've got a Black female vice president, and you had, see the T-shirts and the signs. There's no greater time than to be a Black woman, but we're still struggling significantly, I think, in being able to show up as ourselves. I talk about this sometimes about code switching, not just in speech, but even in our look, code switching with our hair, maybe sometimes even with our makeup, with the clothes that we wear. And I want to begin to empower our community, but especially Black women in leadership and in high profile positions to be able to be more vulnerable, to be able to just show up as ourselves and not worry about how we're perceived, because I think that that directly affects our mental health. No, it does for me. Like sometimes I could stress for like hours over, if I want to go and get a protective style, can I get this style in the level of leadership that I'm at? Can I show up in any space with my hair? If I want to just get to Goddess braids going back. So how do you coach women through being able to show up as themselves and get through that? I guess that's internal need, because it's not an external pressure.
Right.
That is an internal pressure I put on myself. How do you coach women through getting past the code switching through all the different ways that we do it?
So first I want to address, I think it is an external pressure, even though we're dealing with it internally, because we're still dealing with societal norms and practices. And although we're shifting post-COVID and all that has happened for Black women to begin to show up authentically, and I think just women as a whole, I think there's still the things in the back of our head that make us question like what the norm is and what society is. Today, let me be real honest. When I thought about business casual,
Right.
I thought about my business casual and how that's different than what we perceive to be business casual.
Right.
And if I am going to inspire women to be authentic, it has to start with me.
Right.
Like I have to be comfortable enough to show up in a space the way I'm feeling, not offensive, but just the way I'm feeling. So business casual was different for me today. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not wearing slacks. But I have to do that because I have to internally break the thought of what that looks like and what the perception is if you don't come in a certain way.
Right.
And so to answer your question, I think the true answer for me is I teach as I go. I feel like you can't lead where you don't go. You can't teach what you don't know. And so as I evolve into those spaces, it's easy for me to help women evolve into those same spaces where you're comfortable in your skin. I am 51 years old. And the other day, I posted some pictures from my Mexico trip. And I've had people question, like, you're a mom. Why are you in a two-piece? I'm like, I'm at the beach. Like, is that okay? But there's still these ideas of how we're supposed to show up in whatever space, we occupy. So when you talk about women in corporate spaces and leaders, that's the question. There is a Crown Act going on now in Texas. And I'm loving watching that because we should be able to wear our natural hair.
Right.
We should be able to show up and not worry about someone having something to say about what our hair looks like.
Right.
Like it's hair.
Right.
But because of the societal norms that we've grown up to understand, there is a look that's professional. And I think that that's changing. And I'm here for all of listen, for everything woman, I am here for it. But I think it's going to take some more time for us to fully embrace the level of our greatness as women. Not an ego or anything like that. I think that we are great and we are precious and we should be treated that way, just in society as a whole. But we should treat ourselves that way first.
Right.
And a lot of what we are doing as women now starts within us. So everybody that you see that is stepping up to the plate and those leaders, they've had to do that internal work because you can't kind of jump out there if you haven't, because of all of the criticism that you'll get. So I think post-COVID, George Floyd and all of the things that was going on, I think it opened up some spaces for us to really, as women, kind of step into a different what's the word I'm looking for? Just a different being. When you think about Black women, I think it's opened some doors for us to really start having these conversations about how we feel, what we need, and be okay with expressing that to the public,
Right.
as opposed to just kind of shunning away and living kind of quiet. I don't want to do that.
Right.
Yeah, at all.
Right. I just thought about something that you said, and I heard the word apologetic or unapologetic, right? How can I just continue to show up as me and don't feel like I have to apologize for it, right? How can I just be unapologetically me? Earlier, you talked about dealing with body dysmorphia. And lately, I guess because of the space that I work in, and often I go into rooms with other executive directors, and I may be one of very few Black executive directors and Black female executive directors. I don't know if it's a subconscious external thing, again, that the whole thing about the code switching, but I often feel like I'm also the only body type, like I'm the only full-figured, curvier woman in a space. And I don't know if it's me, overthinking, but how do we just, feel comfortable in our bodies? And I know that, you're professionally trained, and, fitness is a huge part of your business. I want to talk about how we encourage ourselves to be healthy, but not always think like we have to, especially as Black women. I just feel like we always gonna have a little bit more something on us, right? How do we just, show up like comfortable in our skin and not feel like we have to reshape ourselves to look like others? Because especially if we're in rooms with women that don't look like us.
I think that, again, it goes back to how we see ourselves. And I think that that's where the deep dive comes in, which is why mental health counseling and coaching and all of those things are important, because we need to be able to have these conversations with someone who can ask the right questions to get us to really think about where the thought even started. Like, where did the thought start, where you walk in a room and you feel like, oh, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about being in here, or I want to make sure my hair, like, where did that first come from? And if you can trace back to where it first started, we can really start doing the work to undo those things that have been done, the things that have been said. For me, I was teased for years about being dark-skinned, and I despised being dark-skinned for decades. I was probably in my late 20s before I really saw myself as beautiful, because I was trained by what other people said that my dark skin wasn't beautiful. But I didn't understand where that came from for years. I just felt like, okay, I don't measure up for some reason. And so I think that when we really start asking ourselves, where did this really come from? It could be our family of origins, because growing up, you had to have straight hair. Like, you couldn't go out with kinky hair. And so we subconsciously still have those things in our mind. So when we walk into spaces where there are people that don't necessarily look like us, we question ourselves because we're used to them being the
standard.
Correct, the standard.
Right.
We're accustomed to that. We change that when we start looking deeply into who we are. One, and then understanding how God created us. Like, that is important to me, to know that God doesn't make a mistake in creation.
Right.
And so if I'm saying, oh, I'm not this, that, or the other, I'm saying God made a mistake, but God didn't make a mistake. It is, I've been conditioned by society to see that my beauty is not the standard, or it's substandard. So then when I walk in these rooms, I am immediately faced with feeling insecure.
Right.
Why?
Right.
I purposely nowadays walk in rooms real loud because I don't want to hide behind what somebody said about me. I don't want to hide behind what people think I should be or I should present. I want to really be authentic in who I am and enjoy the things I enjoy and show up in spaces just like I'm supposed to. And I think that is what draws people. I have had, over the last couple of years since being here in Charlotte, I've had so many people, like, oh my God, who are you? Where did you come from? And it feels good, but it feels like it should have always been that. I was the one hiding because of what other people said.
Right.
So to answer your question, I really do believe that if we want to walk in these spaces and if we want to feel whole and beautiful and without the heavy burden, and we need to start really digging into where it came from.
Right.
The root of it is where we need to get to. And once we get to the root, we can pull that up.
Right.
And then we can transform into something totally different. Like we can really build our lives the way we would love them to be, the way we see them, the way we've dreamed of, if we get to the root of what's causing us not to get there.
Right.
Yeah.
I recently went through a divorce, and my second divorce, actually, and also like changing jobs. I, thought I had like the dream career. A couple of years ago, it was in the C-suite, and just and I had to make a choice between, and the two collided. So going through the divorce and then leaving what I thought was my dream job, and God really taking me through about an 18-month like reawakening of who I am. And I didn't have insurance at the time. I was working for myself full time, so I couldn't really afford to be in therapy. And I've recently gotten back into therapy because I realize now, like, if I am going to show up in the spaces as my full, authentic self, I appreciate what you just said, about entering rooms intentionally almost louder, because I think every woman, every human, right? Every woman specifically, and then every Black woman even more specifically, we need to be able to show up in rooms, because I do think that when we show up, things shift. The atmosphere shifts.
Yes.
Like, we are so powerful. One of my pastors, shout out to Pastor Darius Daniels and Shamika Daniels, but Pastor Shamika will say, when I walk into the room, help walks in, and I believe that. When I walk into a room, help walks in, and grace walks in, and beauty walks in, and intelligence walks in. But there's so many environments that make us feel not ashamed, but like we're not allowed to show up like that. We're not allowed to stand in who we are and the fullness in which God created us. I decided to name this podcast Strong Place because I want to help people in general, but our community specifically, redefine and reclaim the word strong, because strong now I think is starting to be, correspond with pain, suffering, but the Bible uses the word strong in such great ways. What is your thoughts on being strong? And as a bodybuilder, right? I'm sure that that has a whole different connotation to you as well. But what's your thoughts about being strong?
I can answer that differently now than I did before, because strong was definitely, the grind and the heartache and getting through all of that. Nowadays, I see strength in vulnerability and being able to be aware, self-aware. I see strength in being able to set boundaries and being able to be disciplined in my life. Strength looks a little different, although bodybuilding, it means physical. For me, it doesn't mean having to endure heartache anymore. I think that that's the meaning that we kind of give being strong, like you're strong enough to handle. But I'm strong enough to now show you my vulnerabilities. I'm strong enough now to show you my insecurities and be able to talk about them as a part of who I am, because that's what makes me absolutely amazing.
Right.
Not how much I can handle, not the heartache I go through, but being able to love in spite of, being able to show up and help. That's strength for me, being able to articulate moments that I don't feel well. And I honestly, over the last 4 years, I kind of learned that from my daughter. My oldest daughter is diagnosed with bipolar type 2. And she is very comfortable now saying, I can't handle that. And I would have never said that before. I would have never told anybody I couldn't handle anything. But there is strength in being honest with your capacity and being okay with what people think. And I think that if we can communicate that tears mean you're strong enough and that your body is just, saying, okay, let's release this. I think about men, and we'll talk about them really quick because we're talking about mental health. For years, men were told that men don't cry.
Right.
And I think strength is allowing your emotions to be what they are and feel your feelings.
Right.
That's being strong, because it doesn't change who you are. It's a moment in time. It is a physical reaction, but it doesn't change the nature of who you are. It doesn't change your character, your integrity. It doesn't make you weak. That's strong to me. Yeah.
So another thing we have in common, my daughter was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder too.
Wow. We have a lot in common.
Yeah. And I was thinking the other day about, just how she approaches things, and just thinking also like I could learn a lot from her, and not always thinking like I have to be able to handle everything or be the go-to person for everyone. I can just say, I can't deal with I can't deal with that. A few weeks ago, I said to my office administrator, I need for you to put some block some time out on my calendar daily for my mental health.
Good for you.
I cannot
Good for you.
do these packed 8-9 hour days, back-to-back meetings. And she did it immediately. And so shout out to Sage for that, because she was like, you got to tell me once. I hear you, because I realized I'm depleted at the end of the day, because I'm trying to show up for all my staff, every meeting, all the vendors that want my time.
And you can't, you're one person.
Right. And
I think that in the past, for me, that was just life. That's not life anymore for me. And so I get it. And I'm wired to just show up. I intentionally do the same things. It's like, I'm going to pick and choose now where I want to go, how I want to do this, because we then will wear ourselves out to please other people, and they're still not pleased. They're still not satisfied.
Again, put people in the back.
It's always going to be something.
Yes, right?
They will wear you out, especially when I'm coaching, when we talk about fitness. The one excuse we always have is that we don't have enough time, but we give time to everything else. Everything else but our own health and wellness. We will give that out and then wonder why we're tired and depleted and we're running on fumes, and people wonder why we're agitated and irritated. But it's because we're giving our time away. We're not taking, and we're not being intentional about the same time we give everybody else, the meetings that we set up.
Right.
Give that. So bravo to you for doing that, because not everybody will do that, because we think, oh my God, if I do that, what are people going to think? Who cares?
Right. Not my problem anymore.
Who cares?
And I think it's just the stage I am at in my career now, where I feel like I have to remind myself always, no, you paid your dues.
Yes.
I worked 60, 70-hour weeks,
No.
underpaid, doing and being everything for everyone.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm not doing that anymore.
I am there.
And I try to also teach my staff, like, learn from my mistakes, right? And don't do that.
And so leadership should be able to do that. And that's why I'm really interested in talking to corporate leaders about just that. Because if you have a leader that does not appreciate taking time off or mental health, and it's just a go, 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 then the staff is going to feel that.
Right.
But you have leaders that understand the necessity of blocking off, even if it's 30 minutes in my day,
Right.
and articulating that to the staff. I think you have a much better relationship, and people are more productive
Right.
when they feel like, oh, okay, I can really do that.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just working people because you like, I'm sorry, you like to work like that.
Right.
I don't
And I
wanna
used
do
to,
that.
but I don't anymore.
I learned a few years back, it's probably been 6 or 7, I was reading things about, billionaires and corporate leaders and owners of businesses when they get later in life. And they talked about, like, when people asked them, what would you change and do differently? And people would add time to enjoy life to their schedule. That's what I hear a lot of older people that have kind of gone. And I'm like, I don't want to do that when I'm old. Like, I don't want to look back and say, I wish I would have added extra time, or I wish I would have taken a vacation, or I wish I wouldn't have worked as much. At 50, I'm like, I've paid my dues too.
Right.
Like, I'm not doing that right now.
Right.
I am going to honor my body, my mind, my spirit, and really help people understand you don't have to get to 50 to do that. You can start really early, and here's how. You should be able to put that in place for yourself, because who wants to work and not enjoy life? Like, who wants to do that?
So boundaries are the new strong.
Oh, yes.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me today. Tell the world where they can find you at, where they can find you on social media. Because, I'll be on your LinkedIn, I'll be on your Instagram. So tell the world where they can find you.
Again, my name is LaTrice Davis, affectionately known as Jag. You can find me on Instagram at IamJagFit, and it's FITT. And Jag Fit stands for Just Another Girl, Fully Invested in Transformation. You can also find me on Inspired Wellness by Jag on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And I would give you my phone number, but
no problem.
But yeah, that's where
that's
where you can find me if you have any questions, want to just kind of chat about mental health, physical health. I am a coach, I am a speaker, and I'm here for service. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
LaTrice.
Jim, thank you.
I really appreciate our conversation today.
You as well.
I'm Aya Johnson, Executive Director of Mental Health America, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Strong Place.